Hey, Adam here, and welcome back. Firstly, a lot of people have been asking me to make a shirt, and I've finally done it. So if you want one, I'll link it at the top of the description, and if you do get one to support the channel, then please do use the promo code BIZARRE20 and you'll get 20% off. Right, with that highly important message out of the way, I've come across a very unusual disappearance that I haven't seen covered a whole lot, and I'd like to thank Adam Wazar for sharing this with me. Right, Cullen Finnerty was 30 years old when he disappeared under very unusual circumstances on a solo fishing trip on the Baldwin River in Michigan on the 26th of May 2013. Cullen was a very fit man, and according to all of the sources, he had an outstanding career as a quarterback. This was his passion from a young age, and he excelled at Brighton High School before moving on to play for the University of Toledo and then reaching new heights from there, getting inducted into the Michigan Sports Hall of Fame in 2018. The first time we hear of Cullen's disappearance seems to come from the NFL.com. Authorities are searching for Cullen Finnerty, a quarterback who led Grand Valley State to 3 Division II National Football Championships after he failed to return from fishing near his northern Michigan cabin. WZZM-TV says his family owns a cabin near Bray Creek State Forest Campground. The site is near Baldwin and about 65 miles north of Grand Rapids. Authorities say searchers found a small pontoon boat Finnerty was using to fish. He was dropped off by his family on that day, and to clarify though, he wasn't alone at the cabin, but was when he made the decision to go fishing. We have to get bizarre right from the get-go here, because something had gone seriously awry during this trip. The Lake County Sheriff's Department says Finnerty was having what the family described as an episode, and say he was scared and wandered into the woods. On the second day of the search, the 28th, one of the most successful quarterbacks in college football history was found deceased in the woods of northern Michigan on Tuesday night, 3 days after disappearing while out fishing near his family's cottage. His body was found about 8 PM in the woods within a mile of where he disappeared, said Lake County Undersheriff Dennis Robinson. The cause of passing wasn't immediately clear, but Robinson said that foul play wasn't suspected. He said the body was not in the water and was found in a wooded area in Weber Township, near the family's cottage. The search drew scores of police and volunteers, including staff and players from Grand Valley State. Finnerty last spoke to a family member that night in a phone call in which he said he was nervous about something, said Sheriff Robert Hills. At this stage, it's not completely clear what Cullen was becoming fearful of, but because of his call, his family members were obviously concerned for his safety and they contacted the authorities. They believed that he may have had some kind of mental episode, had seen something, or just thought he'd seen something that made him feel fearful before running off aimlessly into the woods. The sheriff had also clarified that they'd been tracking his cell phone in an attempt to locate him before the signal stopped, presumably indicating that the battery had run out, or possibly he entered an area where there was no signal. It's not clear at this point. This is also somewhat interesting too. When Cullen finished fishing, he called his wife and said he was scared. He then abandoned his equipment and ran into the woods. No contact has been established with Cullen since that phone call. Searchers discovered his pontoon boat at the scene, but it was empty. Search crews around the river and helicopter view of the woods have not been successful in finding him. Cullen was having what his family describes an episode, and say he was scared and wandered into the woods. His family says he suffered several concussions in his career, and they are concerned it may have triggered this episode. When he reported to his wife that he felt afraid, he'd also requested that they come and pick him up. Again, it's not clear what was happening or what he thought was happening, but when the family arrived to retrieve him, he'd vanished. It's odd that this came on so quickly, because from my limited understanding, when someone is having an episode like this, there are normally a few precursor signs that you can look for. You might notice that someone has become easily confused all of a sudden, seems a bit dazed out of nowhere, is repeating questions and doesn't quite look like they're understanding what's happening. Just things of that nature. I suppose Cullen could have been incredibly unfortunate in that after leaving his family to go fishing, that is the exact moment it started to happen and no one was around to see or notice. It could be that if he was prone to these kinds of episodes, being alone in this wooded area might have spooked him and made him feel creeped out or panicky, At which point you begin to have those thoughts of panic and you provoke the spiral in doing so. You know, you feel spooked, so you begin to panic, your heart starts racing, you want out of the situation, but you can't leave, and you end up going round and round, and it just gets worse. That is speculation, of course, and we have no real way of thoroughly understanding what exactly was taking place. Right, let's talk about the actual scene of discovery. We were walking a good line. I squatted down because we'd seen some trail. A girl shouted. She walked right up on the body, said Scott Boyd, who was on the search party that made the discovery. Cullen was found wearing fishing waders and a camouflage jacket. He was in the woods about half a mile north of where he disappeared while on a fishing trip. There were no apparent injuries and no signs of foul play according to the sheriff. There was nothing obvious to us to the view of anything that would have caused his passing. Or in other words, Cullen had no injuries to speak of, thus the reasoning that foul play was not considered. It also seems that some of the family members were surprised in regards to the idea of some kind of mental breakdown, or some similar problem because there had been no prior indication. We had brats and hamburgers with Cullen on Saturday and grilled chicken on Sunday. Everything was cool. It was a great weekend. We had lots of smiles, a lot of laughs. There were no indications and there were no problems. It's also important to clarify that it was that very Sunday he disappeared. After having a good time, appearing happy and content and having food with his family, showing no signs of issue, he decided that he was going to go on that fishing trip Sunday night. The spot that he'd chosen to go to was around a quarter of a mile away from the cabin. At this point, we have to get back to the phone signal because I'd found mention of an unusual fact that makes things somewhat more difficult to understand, and it threw me off a bit because I just wasn't expecting this. So we're going to have to get weird again. The search for Cullen gained focus Thursday when a signal from his cell phone was picked up 11 miles north of his last known location, mlive.com reports. Cullen has been missing since Sunday night when he went fishing alone. Authorities are also using helicopters and dogs. Sources told mlive.com that volunteers and trained searchers were headed to the area where the phone was traced. Well, that certainly confuses things a bit, doesn't it? If Cullen's body was found within a mile of where he disappeared from, in what circumstances does the phone pinging 11 miles away make sense? Was it an error? Because otherwise I can't think of a great explanation. Could it be that Cullen had initially made it 11 miles away, at which point he then headed back? That seems unlikely, because in that situation, you'd have expected the dispatch search group to find him. Actually, what do you make of that? I'd quite like to hear some other opinions on that one. It'd be interesting to know just how long into the search that was, and if they'd had any other pings before or after. I'd like to know what the timescale was of travelling this 11 miles, because he must have done it twice, because he was then found in an area less than a mile away from the fishing location. Or perhaps the source is just wrong? I don't know. Just to further compound the confusion in this incident, on the 29th of May, the autopsy reports were reported widely by the press. A cause of passing was not determined Wednesday after an autopsy on Cullen's body was performed. There was no obvious sign of heart trauma on Cullen Finnerty, said Lake County Sheriff Robert Hiltz. The autopsy ruled out anything real obvious, Hiltz said in a phone interview. There was nothing that stood out as the cause. We are glad there is no foul play at this time. Hiltz said Finnerty had called his wife and expressed concern about being out on the river. He was just uncomfortable about his surroundings at the time. He said that he was getting off the river and things went downhill from there. Specifically, it looks like he'd said that he had some concerns, which weren't expressed to my knowledge. He said that he was getting hit with brush and was getting off the river. It also seems like those in charge were expecting and hoping to find the cause during the autopsy, which obviously didn't happen. So you really can now suggest that there can't have been any injuries present at all. Okay, let's get bizarre. Cullen was found deceased in the woods of Michigan last night after going missing Sunday evening on a fishing trip near a family cabin. Now, the surrounding circumstances provided more new questions than answers. Wild blueberry plants and bracken fern dot the forest floor. Overhead, white pines reach skyward, straight up, 60 feet, 75 feet, maybe even more. Beneath their canopy, lesser pines bed to the forest floor. Somewhere near this spot, Cullen lost his way and he couldn't find his way out. Dave Kibbe owns this deep 10-acre parcel. It extends directly 1/4 mile north of the state's Bray Creek campground, where Cullen went missing Sunday night. It's hard to walk in a straight line, but you cannot walk half a mile without hitting a road. Isn't this weird, says Kibbe, 59, as he surveys the forest landscape 1/4 mile north from the campground where Cullen went missing. We watched this in 15 minutes. He does not understand. Cullen was here for 2 days after disappearing. Police say he was found Tuesday night and had no serious injuries. At Bray Creek campground, 2 self-described psychics pulled into the site. Elizabeth Redwolf Krebs, 50, says she is a medicine woman with the Southern Cherokee Nation out of South Carolina. She says she can feel a presence and has something like nerve pain shooting up both arms. Standing near the river at a point where Cullen is believed to have gone missing. The back of my head is pounding. I feel like there is someone who is here with us. I feel it. Something happened. I feel it all over my body. God, it won't go away. It's strong. Overwhelming. Both say they have tried to help local authorities before with disappearances. Now, of course, it's up to you how much emphasis you place on that and what they had to say. I'm perhaps a bit more conventional than that, but I'm not going to pretend like I know everything. Maybe something very unusual did happen. A number of merchants in Baldwin at the time did say that they'd been listening to police radio and wondered why it was taking so long to find him. They said that in these radio transmissions, apparently the authorities had said that Cullen had said that he was scared, that there were unfamiliar noises in the woods, and that someone was closing in on him. Interestingly, Dave Kibbe said that on the night of the disappearance, at around 7:30 PM, he heard distant noises. I'm hearing yelling and shouting. I thought it was parents who let their kids out too late. It was way off in the distance. After hearing about what had happened, Dave returned to his camper in Bray Creek to see if Cullen had perhaps let himself inside. He hadn't, but from what I understand, he was found not too far away from the camper. Okay, so this now raises more questions. Who was yelling and shouting? Was this Cullen? A third party of some description? Or was it, as thought, just completely unrelated? I've no idea what you even do with that. Cullen was found without any injuries, and a cause of passing couldn't be determined. This does suggest very strongly that there wasn't a third party involved, and also perhaps suggest that he was audibly struggling and fearful. However, as pointed out though, if you can't walk for half a mile in that location without coming to a road, what in the world happened? If Cullen was in the spot that he was discovered the entire time, that really does seem like he should have been found sooner. It's also not clear who exactly would have been closing in on him, given that again, there was no evidence to suggest anything like that had happened. On that point, we keep getting little additional pieces of information in regards to the phone call, and somehow the call keeps changing, though the message remains familiar. He said he was leery of some things, Sheriff Bob Hilt said Wednesday. We are not sure what he was leery of. No one witnessed anything. It also sounds like, while the authorities weren't suspecting foul play publicly, were they acknowledging privately that this whole situation did seem a bit off? I'm not sure, but I can see why one might lean in that direction. Let's talk about the scale of the search too, and how that may accentuate the peculiarity of Cullen's disappearance. The search started the night of May 26 when Cullen went missing in the woods here, amid towering white pines and shrubby scrub oak trees and owls and white-tailed deer. By Monday morning, helicopters circled overhead as cadaver dogs combed through the brush below. By that Tuesday, the search party had ballooned to include 13 officers from Lake County, 22 reserve officers, and almost 100 location volunteers, and so many friends and family members that the assembled lost count. They fanned out in small groups separated by 100 yards, walking the same direction, crossing square-mile sections of the Weber Township grid. Some waded through waist-high swamps, others fought through dense foliage. I'd also like to add to that, I've seen it mentioned numerous times that alongside family, friends, the 100 volunteers, alongside all of the officials, there were over 100 players and coaching staff out too looking for him, so there's no wonder they lost count. To say that this was a monumental effort would be underselling it, and it's things like this that restore my faith in humanity. Everyone wanted Cullen found, and quickly. Right. Now I only bring this up because I have also seen it mentioned that some people were confused as to why it took so long to find him, given the area. I don't want to speculate too much about that, but the logic seems to be that if you can't walk half a mile in any direction without hitting a road, in theory, wouldn't that make it somewhat easier to find him? So why did it take as long as it did? Was he missed? Now, obviously I can't answer that question, but I would like to acknowledge that it absolutely cannot be an easy task to find someone in the bush, surrounded by thick foliage and swampy areas, etc. You've really got to give the search and rescue personnel their due credit. The point is though, while it is a good question as to why it maybe took that long, it's also important to keep in mind the complexities of the areas that you and I are often talking about. Right, now let's have a look at this. Continuing on in that article. As darkness approached on Tuesday, there was one final section the authorities planned to check that day. Cullen had been missing for nearly 48 hours. The group closest to the nearest road, near enough to hear cars purr as they drove past, assumed it would never find him as it stamped through backyards, past trailers, huts, cabins and deer blinds. Martin's gaze shot in that direction and there lay Cullen, face down, arms at his side, wearing olive waders and a camouflage jacket. So little about Cullen's passing made sense. How he complained of headaches and restless sleep in the days before he disappeared. How he went fishing by himself. How he ended up not much more than 100 yards from a road, out in the open, about half a mile from where he docked his pontoon boat. Right, I realise I've said it a few times now, but we do have to get bizarre again. His last two phone calls proved most haunting. One was to his wife, the other from his brother-in-law. Family members said that in both, Cullen sounded panicked. He said he was uncomfortable. He said that he ran into two men on the River Baldwin. He thought they might be following him. While we've acknowledged that you couldn't walk half a mile without finding a road, the fishing area itself was also somewhat secluded. Given that Cullen had been experiencing headaches and these kinds of problems, coupled with the fact that he was found completely uninjured, it seems an important point to question whether these men were actually present or if Cullen simply thoroughly believed that they were, which I think it's quite clear that he did. Whatever he was seeing, or thought he was seeing though, must have been terrifying because his friends and family described him as fearless. His friends dubbed him Superman and Rambo, and the point was made that it wasn't in his nature to run away. So whatever he saw really must have bothered him. I'm also glad that this was acknowledged again. People end up lost in this woods on a regular basis, Robin said, a few times a year. Normally, folks will walk around for a day or so and then we'll bring them out, and they're fine except for some scratches and bug bites. This was not a normal outcome. Officers found a vest, though relatives did not believe it belonged to Cullen. They also found footprints a mile and a half north of where he was dropped off. They had a phone company ping his cell phone, and the results came back as far as 3 miles south and 5 miles north. Still no answers, only questions. What was happening with that, and was the 11 miles just an error? It's not clear if the data was genuine or if there'd been errors involved here. One other problem too is that the timing of the pings haven't been shared. It's just interesting to me that it was moving miles away to the north and to the south at times. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. You could argue that if someone discovered Cullen's body, they'd taken the phone and then proceeded to move to the north and south with searchers around. Let's be honest though, I don't know how reasonable that sounds. Kibby actually made some more comments too. Kibby followed all the news reports, some of which speculated that Cullen went north from the campground into the woods. That would be Kibby's property, or the properties right next to it, where he cut through the brush. None of the reports made sense, Kibby thought. They said that Cullen walked more than half a mile north, and if that was true, he would have traversed all of Kibby's property. He would have hit another road. If he followed Bray Creek northeast, he could have hit a conservation property. He would have run into something, someone in any direction he walked. Kibby tried to imagine where Cullen had passed away, how he arrived there. It's so hard to actually get lost in there, Kibby said. David Tuttle, a bow and arrow hunter, said that he'd seen black bears in the woods there, but he couldn't understand how Cullen had passed away in an open clearing that close to the road. He commented, "It's so close, it's eerie," just referring to the idea that he should have been able to make it to the road. It's very difficult to interpret the full circumstances of Cullen's disappearance because there's one lingering point that you just can't really get around. That is, that it's incredibly difficult to make the case that he'd had any physical altercation or interaction with another person or animal in the area. This is because there was absolutely zero evidence, none, to indicate that that had transpired. Injuries and trauma would have indicated that possibility quite clearly. Now let's get to the final verdict on Cullen's disappearance and passing. A former college football star who disappeared in the Michigan wilderness during a fishing trip passed away due to hypothermia caused by inhaling his vomit after he became disoriented, possibly because of painkillers combined with having a degenerative brain disease. According to an updated autopsy released Thursday, the report said Cullen's anxiety and paranoia in the woods the night of May 26 may have been exacerbated by an elevated level of oxycodone and CTE, the brain disease that has been found in a number of ex-football players. CTE possibly affected his judgment, insight and behaviour, but there are other factors, including the use of medications prescribed by his doctor, that most likely contributed to the circumstances surrounding his passing. This autopsy also revealed that Cullen had a slightly enlarged heart and slightly cloudy lungs too. So in a very brief conclusion, it seems to me that there were a culmination of factors that merged and led to what happened to Cullen. It's not clear to me that that explains absolutely everything that happened here, but that is unfortunately all of the evidence that we have. Things like Kibby's comments of confusion over how any of this happened in the first place, the phone pings miles away, and just the confusion in general looks like it will never be answered clearly. So I suppose on that somber note, I'm going to have to hand it over to you in the comments below. Please do share your thoughts about the circumstances surrounding Cullen's disappearance. I do read all of the comments, so I'm looking forward to hearing fresh thoughts and ideas. Right, with all of that said, I'd just like to thank you for watching, and a special thank you to the patrons who allow me the time to do this. If you found the video interesting, then please do remember to hit the like button, subscribe and hit the bell. If not, then feel free to give the video a thumbs down. I'm just looking for your honest opinion, either way. I hope that you've had a great day, or evening, depending on where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. Be safe guys, peace.